and I know some of you have travelled far and wide to be with us here today, and I especially welcome Dr Lynn's great-grandnephew Alan Park and his wife Pat, who have travelled all the way from Australia to be with us here today, and we are truly honoured to have you here today. So today we gather to remember and honour Dr Kathleen Lynn, revolutionary, socialist, suffragist, feminist, trade unionist and pioneering doctor. A remarkable woman who devoted her life to the cause of Irish freedom and social justice for all. We commemorate her here today on the 64th anniversary of her death and also the 100th anniversary of the foundation of St.Ultan's Hospital for Infants, which she co-founded with her fellow revolutionary and activist, Dr. Madeline Ffrench Mullen.
When we look back to Dr. Kathleen Lynn from the 21st century, we understand her life from our own experience of meeting her as patients, some of us as feminists, others as socialists. She certainly was a radical woman.
It was a great honour to have the privilege of unveiling this headstone in Deansgrange to commemorate Kathleen Lynn on the anniversary of her death and the centenary of the founding of the St.Ultan's Hospital for Infants. And she was one of the greatest women in history, I think, Kathleen Lynn, because she straddled all of the major progressive movements from the end of the 19th century to the middle of the 20th. She was there in Mayo for the time of where she saw such deprivation, destitution, as the many famines. There wasn't just the 48 famine, there was the 79, the 80, and then the land, the desperate situation on the land.
Kathleen Lynn had grown up in the west of Ireland, where stories of the Great Famine still haunted the people, stories of suffering and death, and with little assistance given by those in power.
Intelligent and with encouraging parents, she was one of those pioneering women who broke a mould by studying medicine, until then an exclusively male profession. She became the third woman to be confirmed with a fellowship of the Royal College of Surgeons, and then proceeded to practice as an ophthalmologist in Dublin's Eye and Ear Hospital.
And she succeeded in in becoming a doctor and qualifying, but of course because of the prejudice of the time against her and other women, she was not allowed to be a registrar in any of the hospitals. And as fate would have it, in view of her later life, she got her experience in the laying in hospitals, in the maternity wards of the Coombe and the Rotunda. And as it happened, that was what her life work would be. But she was also, of course, a suffragette, a feminist, trade unionist, socialist, as well as doctor, revolutionary. So while campaigning for the votes for women, she met other great women of her time, and meeting Constance Markievicz and Helena Molony, that led her to Liberty Hall, where she served the soup kitchens in 1913. And that, of course, in its turn led her to Jim Larkin and James Connolly, and the trade union movement and the Irish Citizen Army.
Kathleen Lynn saw Ireland not as a colony but as a nation, and joined the Irish Citizens Army of James Connolly, in which she was appointed its medical officer.
She was a member of Cumann na mBan and was elected a TD to the second Dáil in 1922. She rejected the treaty on the grounds that it denied the establishment of a republic in which Ireland would be master of her own destiny. She remained that most rare of individuals, an idealist. Her comrade in the Irish Citizen Army, the playwright Sean O'Casey, would write, "You cannot put a rope around the neck of an idea. You cannot put an idea up against the barrack square and riddle it with bullets. You cannot confine it in the strongest prison cell your slaves could ever build." And so it was with Kathleen Lynn. Though some of the former revolutionaries had exchanged their flat caps for top hats and trappings of power, little had changed for the poor of the poorest city in Europe. Its most vulnerable were the children born to starvation and inflicted with disease even before birth. They had little hope and none was given. It was just what happened in the day.
That brought her into the foundation moments of the state's history, from which grew Ireland's independence. And it was a life shared with many brave and visionary women who not only dreamt of the best for Ireland, but pursued that dream with courage and imagination, making many personal sacrifices in order to play their part in crafting a fairer and more just world.
In discussing her role in later life, she said about herself, which this is the bit I really love, that she was quite sympathetic to the militant side of things. And the impression I got from my own mother, who met her, was that she, as a mother with a child who needed help, that she was very much a lady. So when I read that, I thought that was very amusing altogether.
It was also a life rooted in a great spirit of compassion and care, and dedicated to the construction of a true republic in its truest sense. So, in preparation for the Easter Rising, as Chief Medical Officer, she trained the members of the Irish Citizen Army and the volunteers in first aid. And in the Rising herself, she transported armaments in her car, and she brought the medical supplies for setting up first aid stations to all of the different rising points. And then she was second in command to Sean Connolly.
The fighting at Easter week saw her in the City Hall, and when her commanding officer was killed, Kathleen took command of the garrison.
And they held the City Hall until they were forced, because of grenades and bayonet point, to surrender.
When the guns fell silent at the end of Easter week, the British officer rejected her surrender of the heroic garrison, refusing to acknowledge that a woman could hold such a command.
She went on after that to campaign. She was involved in the War of Independence, and she campaigned in the 1918 election. 1919 was that with her lifetime friend, Madeline Ffrench Mullen, that they founded the St.Ultan Children's Hospital in Charlemont Street. And from then on, with other women, she cared for the poor infants and their mothers until her death in 1955.
The revolutionary spirit of Kathleen Lynn did not die of disillusionment as the ideals of 1916 became marginalised in the early years of the Free State. St.Ultan's hospital grew in size and reputation, and in time paediatric healthcare grew from none to basic to amongst the most advanced of its day. Emphasis was put on nutrition when there was no dietitians, put on infectious diseases when there was no antibiotics, and hygiene was promoted in the age when our modern hand sanitizers couldn't even be imagined. This was indeed a revolution in healthcare, and like all revolutions, it met with resistance and indeed disdain. But history was shown that Kathleen Lynn and her unbought champions would prevail. In recent years, we in the College of Physicians, the 1916 Relatives Committee, Dublin City Council, Mayo County Council, numerous academics, distinguished historians, the National Graves Association, and countless citizens have proposed that the new Children's Hospital be named for that patriot and champion of children's health, Kathleen Lynn. After all, the hospital where she once worked is still called the Royal Victoria Hospital. Alas, our calls fell on deaf ears of those in political powers. Perhaps the memory of Dr Lynn is like Banquo's ghost at the feast of today's Ireland. We live in an era when politics and idealism seldom remain friends for long. However, as a city and a country, and speaking for the College of Physicians and as a profession, we are indeed grateful that Dr Lynn chose not to compromise on these ideas which guided her remarkable journey.
She proved impossible to separate from those ideals in life. And we stand here today, we recall the woman, her wonderful achievements and the ideals that inspired her when she were viewed with disdain by the powers of the day. To quote the poet W.B. Yeats, "Let the fools rage, she swerved in naught, and something to perfection brought." We in the College of Physicians regard Kathleen Lynn not just as a patriot and a doctor, but as someone who, against political pressure, led the revolution of paediatric care and who remains a beacon of a modern and inclusive healthcare by us as a profession. One of the college's most prestigious honours is the Kathleen Lynn Medal, awarded to the candidate who has been outstanding in the field of child health.
And the hospital stayed open until 1975, when attempts to amalgamate it with the National Children's Hospital was proposed by the Archbishop of Dublin, and it eventually it had to close. But she and other women, Madeline Ffrench Mullen and Dorothy Stopford, they were the ones who pioneered the use of the vaccines to counter the great scourge and the widespread disease of tuberculosis.
There are many people also who remember Kathleen Lynn and her colleagues in St.Ultan's Hospital and credit them with being alive today. They remember her as a kind and loving doctor. Her life's work was about using her skills to make the lives of others better, particularly those living in extreme poverty. She was quite before her time in believing that social conditions had a major impact on health and opportunity.
And their efforts saved thousands of children's lives, and again, in spite of resistance from the church and the state. So to me, it's interesting the connection that there is there with Dr. Noel Browne, who was Minister for Health in 1949, built hospitals to deal with the TB, and then in the 1950s, the widespread use of the BCG vaccination eventually more or less eradicated the disease. But it's also interesting that he too, in his turn, was opposed by the church and by the medical profession, and not supported by the government when he sought to introduce the mother and child scheme that would have provided maternity care for the welfare of women. So I find that her connection comes right up through everywhere, and her influence. So it is for all those and many other reasons. I mean, her involvement with looking after children from Germany from the Second World War and finding them homes in Ireland, so many other things, such as humanitarian, that it's a cause of joy and celebration that the fullness of Dr. Kathleen Lynn's life work is acknowledged and commemorated here, and it's particularly fitting that the descendants of the people in the Irish Citizen Army and the volunteers are here today. That's of course been the gratitude to the 1916 Relatives Association for keeping all those events alive. And it is such a pleasure and privilege to have her grandnephew and Pat here with us all the way from Australia.
I found a piece of a poem recently, written anonymously, which reminded me of Dr. Lynn. It's winter in the dark heart of tyranny, but the icy winds, which seem to freeze compassion, will, one day, bring about the destruction of the very cruelty which urges them to blow. And on that day, the sun will shine and the light will return. Gurumila Morgan.
When all beside a vigil keep, the west's asleep, the west's asleep, alas and well may Erin weep. When Connacht lies in slumber deep, their Larkin plain smile fair and free, mid rocks their guardian chivalry. Sing, oh, let man learn liberty from crashing wave and lashing sea. A chainless wave and lovely land, freedom and nationhood demand. Be sure the great God never planned slumbering slaves a home so grand.